Welcome everyone. I am MongoSlade. Today we are doing a movie review, believe it or not. I watched a movie last week, Judas and the Black Messiah. We're going to be having a conversation about that tonight. And I want to expand the story a little bit, as I usually do at this time. Um, because while I enjoyed the movie, there were clearly some things about it that raised an eyebrow or two that I would like to discuss. So we're going to get into that eventually. I didn't do a full, I guess you could say, a full write up on the movie, like the whole entire beat for beat of the movie, but there was obviously enough there to that I'm going to remember, and enough to have a conversation on. Um, it so, and also we're probably going to talk about the first two episodes of Daredevil Born Again as well. So I want to say, for starters, thanks to everybody who has stopped by today or listening at some point in the future. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you all very much, especially the people who decide to donate via the Cash App. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And we're going to try to do as much as we can. I try not to do this all night, but it can't be helped sometimes because when movies like Judas and the Black Messiah come out, it becomes mythology. And one of the things that end up happening is people start thinking that the movie is real life and everything about the movie is legit. And if you look up um, some of the players in the movie, you'll get some of the usual opinions about the flick. A lot of people hate William O'Neill. A lot of people love Fred Hampton. That's just the nature of the business, I guess. Um, Clearly, the FBI are the bad guys in the movie. Um, but there's some stuff that I want to discuss. So first, we're going to go through the movie. The movie is pretty simple. A a young man, a carjacker named William O'Neill, is arrested for trying to steal a car, and in exchange for letting him go, the FBI recruit him to infiltrate the Chicago Black Panther Party. They want information on Fred Hampton and all the goings on of the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party. Um, this is set up as Fred Hampton is could quite possibly be the next Black Messiah figure. Now, the time frame is very important here because the movie is set in about 1967. All right. So the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was set up in 1966. All right. That's when Bobby Seale and Huey Newton founded the party. Which so it couldn't have been 1966. It had to be 1967. All right. As the Black Panthers and their ideology start spreading to other cities, Chicago being one of them. Okay. So 1967 thereabouts is when William O'Neill is busted and he is told, "Hey, we'll let you go if you infiltrate the Black Panther Party." So basically, it works like much like Donnie Brasco from there. Okay, he occasionally gets into some trouble. You know, they are one of the better parts of the movie is when he actually does his very stupid trick. Now, the way he was trying to steal cars was one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. He went into the Black Keystone Rangers hideout, pretended to be an FBI agent, and tried to arrest one of the guys in the Rangers. This is very important because it would come up again later. Because he was trying to steal his car, all right? Which is the dumbest thing in the world because all these people see you. The Black Keystone Rangers recognize that that's not an FBI badge he's got, and they start shooting at him, which is common sense. This is what the hell they're going to do. They're gangsters, okay? The gangbangers. What are you doing in our hood trying to steal? Like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because anybody with common sense would have known not to fuck with Jeff Fort and the Keystone Rangers, right? Anybody with good common sense would know not to do that. But William O'Neill is a simpleton, apparently, and he decided he was going to steal or try to steal from the Black Keystone Rangers, which is a complete idiocy. Okay. So one of my favorite scenes is the guy whose car he tried to steal, or one of the guys whose car he tried to steal, who saw him in the pool hall, sees him later with the Black Panthers and calls it out, essentially like, "Oh, you forgot your badge, fed." And this, of course, makes the Black Panthers very suspicious about who he is, leading to a very tense scene with a female Black Panther pulling a gun on him in the front seat of a car, and him saying that he steals cars, and he had to go through the whole thing about why he was trying to steal a car from the Black Keystone Rangers, which is dumb. And he's a car thief, essentially. And so he starts really getting himself into some heat. And this was a pretty good part of the movie because at this point, the Panthers actually like him. You know, he starts doing, community work with them. He's hanging around all the time. He's not doing anything specific, but he's doing little things here and there with them. And they come to know him. They come to like him, but they're suspicious of him. They're just suspicious of everybody, essentially. And at this point, this is the first time he's really in some trouble. And he's got the keys to this car, even though he claims he stole it. Then he said he hotwired it and changed the locks on it, which all sounds very elaborate. But that was a very tense part of the movie. And I thought that was pretty well done, as he has to try to convince these very paranoid Black Panthers about, how he was seen by these guys and why he was pretending to be a federal agent and all this stuff. Another really good scene in the movie is he's trying to escalate things. Now, this, of course, is very Hollywood. So you have William O'Neill, who is bringing explosives to the Black Panthers, trying to get them to use them. And he is told by Fred Hampton pretty much to fuck off. They don't do that kind of stuff in his Black Panther Party. They're not blowing up anything. They're not using any bombs or anything like that. And that's entrapment. But it's also, Hollywood, right? Another one of my favorite scenes, he's trying to get these guys to admit to something on wires, and they don't admit to anything. The relationship between William O'Neill and his handler is actually one of the better scenes in the movie, as he is allowed to come to his handler's house. I think his handler's name was Roy Mitchell, if I remember correctly. He was allowed to come to his handler's house, and he sat there in his living room, or was it like his dining room or something like that, and they had a chat about what kind of person Fred Hampton is and what's going on, and they're applying pressure for him to escalate, to try to find something that they could arrest him on. And that's when he started. I think it was after that he tried the bomb thing, and then he tried to get them on wiretaps and all that kind of stuff. They show, in terms of how the movie escalates, the death of the police officers, and now things intensify. Now they really want to get the Panthers off the street, and there was also the great shootout scene at the Panthers headquarters. I thought was a really great scene, as William O'Neill is given a gun and pretty much was told to shoot at the police, he positions himself on the rooftop where nobody else is, so he doesn't have to shoot at the cops. Now, of course, the end of the movie shows that William O'Neill is pressured by Jim Mitchell or Roy Mitchell, whatever his name was, I don't remember, to give the layout of Fred Hampton's house. And after doing that, Fred Hampton is murdered in his sleep. They heavily imply in the movie that William O'Neill drugged Fred Hampton, and I don't know if Fred Hampton was drugged or not. I don't know that. I didn't go into that. But he is executed in his bed, and that's essentially the end of the movie. Now, for Fred Hampton's part of the movie, he is positioned as basically the sort of stereotypical revolutionary, good-hearted, cared for his community. They had a nice little love story with him and the young poet that ended up having his son later on. But he is pretty much treated as some angelic figure who all he ever did was care about the community. He cares about the people. And while he was kind of pushy and aggressive, it was all for the better good. Yeah. I mean, it was a good movie. To me, it was Donnie Brasco for Negroes. All right. Very much a movie about the FBI's. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this as we go into sort of a regular breakdown of the movie. You had in the flick the FBI engaging in COINTELPRO, which is the counterintelligence program. They had sent Jeff Fort a letter supposedly from Fred Hampton, sort of being very aggressive and this was important because one of Fred Hampton's goals is to unite the street gangs and to then engage in open warfare with the United States government, which sounds nonsensical, right? So he sets up a meeting with Jeff Fort, and Jeff Fort presents this letter, and that he supposedly had gotten from Fred Hampton, even though it was the FBI who wrote it because the slang wasn't right, and it was a nice little dig because this legitimately did happen. Occasionally, the FBI would put out false stories or put out false information in order to keep these gangs from uniting. Again, one of their major, and I'm going to go through this when we talk about COINTELPRO, one of their major goals was to prevent these gangs and these groups from uniting. So pissing off Jeff Fort was a way of keeping him from uniting with Fred Hampton and adding the Black Peace Stone Rangers to the already existing Black Panther Party. Okie dokie. So that was a pretty good scene too. That also is what led to William O'Neill being outed as somebody who had walked around with a police shield or something. So in terms of the movie, like I said, it's very much Donnie Brasco. I don't see how people have no problem with movies like or situations like The Departed or Donnie Brasco or any other movie where an FBI guy goes undercover to investigate, the mob or something, right? And they get real tight-assed about the FBI sending an undercover guy into the Black Panther Party. It shouldn't be that much of a difference. The only reason people see it as something being hugely different is because of the propaganda around the Black Panther Party, being that, oh, they were being harassed because of free breakfast programs. Like, I can guarantee you, nobody has ever just been harassed over a free breakfast program or because they started up a free clinic. It's not realistic. You'd have to have a child's reasoning to think that the federal government is concerned with you feeding children. All right. It was kind of we're going to unify with violent street gangs to overthrow the federal government. That sort of stuff that they will be definitely concerned with. But that's almost always left out of the conversation. All right. J. Edgar Hoover was in the movie as well. I think Martin Sheen plays him. But they were very insistent that Fred Hampton has everything that it takes to be the next Black Messiah. He must be taken down. And I'm like, okay. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to attack Fred Hampton. He's 21, man. He's pretty much a kid. And that's really one of my major gripes with the Black Panthers is how young so many of these people were. And they were so rosy-cheeked and naive. Most of them just had no earthly idea of the stuff that they were saying. You can't declare war on the federal government or on the local police and then pretend like you're not at war. When you're at war, why are you going to, complain that they're infiltrating you? You're at war. Why would you be upset that you're being arrested? You're at war. You declared war on the federal government, You should be thinking about these sorts of things as these are war tactics. So something like COINTELPRO is war tactics. This is something they would have done to the Nazis. And this is what you decided to do, when you have decided you were going to declare war on the federal government. In any event, the movie is pretty straightforward. I think it's very well acted. It's very well shot. I don't think they did a bad job with William O'Neill as a character. They showed him as being very sympathetic, as he was a guy who didn't really have any problems with the Black Panthers. He didn't see anything or experience anything that could jam them up too much. He was just a part of a lot of the social programs that they were participating in and that they became famous for. Now, almost this entire movie is based very heavily on Bill O'Neill's 1989 interview called Eyes on the Prize 2. It's about an hour long or so. And if you want to spend some time going through it, it actually bolsters the movie quite a bit to actually go and watch that. I'm pretty sure I had more notes, because I'm pretty sure I took notes from that thing. And but now I can't find the notes that I took on that episode of Eyes on the Prize. But the real life Bill O'Neill was 19 years old when he got arrested for stealing a car. Now, one of the things that has become a sort of sticking point is, why does the FBI care about a guy who was stealing a car? And Will O'Neill says, well, I stole a car and went across state lines. As soon as you cross state lines with a felony, you fall under the purview of the FBI. It's kind of wishy-washy, okay? But the real life Bill O'Neill sat and talked with, I forget who actually aired the program, the Eyes on the Prize 2. And he basically talked about his time being an informant for the FBI while he was a part of the Black Panther Party. And he admitted that Fred Hampton was not a part of any bombings. He wasn't a part of anything violent or, anything like that. That he had told the FBI about all the guns that Fred Hampton had in his house. And he knew about all these caches of guns that the Black Panther Party had hid all over the city of Chicago. And they had never done anything about any of that stuff. They never acted on any of it. And he admitted that he gave them the layout to Fred Hampton's house. Now, the real life Bill O'Neill was an interesting character because, again, this interview was being done in 1989, which was about 20 years later. Fred Hampton was killed in December of 1969. And this interview was in 1989, and it aired in 1990. And he didn't have anything negative to say about Fred Hampton. He didn't really have anything negative to say about the Black Panthers. For him, he was doing what he was being paid to do. He said ultimately he got paid somewhere between $200,000, and they gave him control of a gas station, or he became a manager at a gas station or something like that. In the movie, they made it seem like he was given a gas station, like they made him a business owner after this. Now, if you know anything about the FBI, they're notoriously cheap, right? They were very, very cheap. Donnie Brasco, Joey Pistone, the guy who infiltrated the mob, or well, one of the mobs. You know, there's 5 families. He only got $500 at the end of his service, and he was within that organization for 6 years. William O'Neill was a member of the Black Panther Party from 1967 to 1969. Or maybe 19. I think he said he was in there for 18 months, so it had to be. And he got snatched out shortly after Fred Hampton was killed. So it was about a year and some change. And you think they gave him $200,000? That's a bit much. Okay, that's kind of a stretch, but that's what Bill O'Neill said. I think that he was paid very handsomely, but infrequently for information, and he didn't always have information. There wasn't always something to tell them because there wasn't always something going on. If you look at the video for Eyes on the Prize 2, which I'm about to pull up in a second, because I think I left a comment that I should read, but okay. So here was what I put in the comment section for the movie, well, for the video, Eyes on the Prize 2, an interview with William O'Neill. I said, quote, "I just saw the movie Judas and the Black Messiah. It was Black Panther propaganda. I wanted to see the entire interview with Bill O'Neill. It is also Black Panther propaganda. Here are some thoughts. 1, Bill said he didn't view what he did as a betrayal because he didn't know the Panthers or care about them before he was recruited, meaning in his mind, he owed no loyalty to this group, which is technically true." Yes, that is true. And he mentions that in this interview that he didn't know any Panthers. He was told to join the Black Panther Party by the FBI. He did not have any previous relationships with these guys. He had to go and join them and then report back to the FBI once he had infiltrated them. This is set up in the movie. After he gets arrested, he's told, go join the Black Panther Party. So he starts going to meetings and, just getting involved. And eventually they let him in. They use him as a trusted member. But they say to you, and if you read the comment section to this video, that he betrayed his people. He betrayed everybody. It's like, well, he was actually in the pockets of the feds before he even became a Black Panther. So he didn't really betray his people, if we're being honest. The second point I put was Bill said that the FBI was only concerned with crimes and connections to known terrorist organizations like the SDS and the Weather Underground, which makes perfect sense. The feds knew the BPP, which is the Black Panther Party, had guns, but were more concerned about explosives. Shootouts with the police were common. Even then, Bill doesn't mention that he informed on those who did the shooting. That's also true. This was Chicago in the 1960s. There was constant issues with the Black Panthers and the police. But more importantly, and we're going to get into a lot of this later, the FBI were definitely concerned with the Students for Democratic Society, who later became the Weather Underground. They had a huge problem with them. All right. That is one of the biggest critiques that I have of the movie, is they put a lot of the onus for why the federal government was paying attention to Chicago and the Chicago Black Panthers on Fred Hampton, when in reality, Chicago was a hotbed of some very serious activity. You had the Nation of Islam in Chicago. You had the Black P. Stone Rangers, Jeff Fort and all those guys in Chicago. You had the Black Panther Party, and you had the SDS, the Student for Democratic Society, which were basically middle-class white students who were also engaging in a lot of extremist conversation, a lot of extremist behaviors. This was very important. And all these organizations were in some way crisscrossing. They may have had crossover members. They may have had individuals who knew other people in other groups. This sort of thing was very important to the FBI for them to know. Okay. And in 1966, it was not, completely and totally out of the ordinary for normal people to be walking around with guns. My third point was that Bill actually vouches for Fred Hampton. He said Fred never drank, smoked, or anything that he saw. Fred was not involved with terrorism or bombings either. That said, the interviewers were not interested at all in what Bill knew about Hampton's robbery case. The robbery case proved Fred was involved with crimes, which would put him in police crosshairs. This is a routine thing with the Black Panther leadership. All of them were criminals at one time or another. In any event, the feds wouldn't care about Hampton's robbery case. It's a local issue for the Chicago police to handle. And this is another one of my critiques of the movie, is that they didn't talk at all about Fred Hampton robbing an ice cream truck. Now, this is a controversial situation, because this is where I start, taking my digs at the Black Panther Party. All right, so in 1969, Fred Hampton was found guilty of robbing an ice cream truck. All right. The story can be found during his appeal, and all that stuff can be found. I'm about to look for it now. The crazy thing is I set up all this stuff on my phone and then didn't realize I was going to be streaming from my phone. So now I have to go and look up the Fred Hampton robbery case. But he was found guilty. Okay, so it was the People versus Hampton, 1969. He had appealed his conviction. So this is from Justia, U.S. Law. It says Fred Hampton was found guilty of the crime of robbery by a jury in the Circuit Court of Cook County and was sentenced to the penitentiary for a term of 2 to 5 years. He brings this appeal attacking the sufficiency of the complaining witness's identification, alleging numerous trial errors, which he claims operated to deny him a fair trial, and complaining that his sentence was excessive. Now, we're going to go through the robbery case as it's laid out here, but I want you to think about something. A lot of Black Panther leaders around this time were going to prison. All right. Bobby Seale had went to prison. Free Huey, because Huey Newton then went to prison. There was a lot of Black Panthers that were going to prison. They were in and out of jail all the time because a lot of these guys were criminals. All right. That's just is what it is. Okay. This is not a value judgment. It is a fact. If you read Huey Newton's book, Revolutionary Suicide, he talks about purposefully going into the hoods and recruiting thugs and gangbangers to bolster the numbers of the Black Panther Party. They were essentially a small intellectual elite surrounded by thugs and gangbangers and, those kinds of guys. So when people start talking about the Black Panthers being criminals, that was by design. Much like the Nation of Islam, who recruited a lot of people while they were in prison, in jail, the Black Panthers were recruiting people who were in jail or prisons or just hoodlums in general. Okay. So this is the Fred Hampton robbery case. So the complaining witness, Nelson Suet, was working for the Good Humor Ice Cream Company as a salesman it says a driver slash salesman. On July the 10th, 1968, he was assigned the route was the village of Maywood. At about 5 p.m. on that day, he drove his Good Humor van to the Irving School playground located within the village and began selling ice cream to the children there. He testified that there were 40 to 50 children and teenagers, all Negro. This was in the 1960s, so they're not going to use the word black. He says in the playground, and that he was the only white person present. He stated that initially the smaller children came to the van to make purchases, but after a few minutes, a group of about 10 or 15 older youths approached and demanded free ice cream. Someone in the crowd asked him if he knew what he was in Black Power territory. At this point, a gray Volkswagen pulled up behind the van, and there were shouts that he would give them free ice cream now that their leader was there. Seward stated that he attempted to close the window of the van, but that one of the crowd jumped up and held the window open. That man, whom he identified as Fred Hampton, got out of the Volkswagen and walked through the crowd. That the person who was holding the window jumped in the van and opened the door. That Hampton came in through the door, grabbed Seward's throat, and threw him over the driver's seat. That while Hampton was holding him down, he saw someone removing ice cream from his truck and distributing it to those outside. During the struggle, Seward placed his foot on Hampton's chest and pushed him to the back of the van, whereupon several youths attacked and beat him. $71 worth of ice cream was taken. $71 of ice cream. All right. So this guy said that Fred Hampton had helped to rob him of $71 of ice cream. He was found guilty for this. And before he died, he was found guilty of robbery. He was going to do 2 to 9 years. He had failed his appeal on November the 26th, 1969. He died just a few days later on December the 4th, 1969. Okay? So why would they kill Fred Hampton if he was about to go to prison? So that would be one of the many questions, because they had arrested a bunch of Black Panther leaders, none of whom were assassinated in the same way that Fred Hampton was assassinated. And I do say he was assassinated. Okay? There's just no doubt about what happened to Fred Hampton and how illegal and abusive and excessive that it was. It's just a fact that he was shot while he was sleeping. But the idea that Fred Hampton was assassinated to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah seems pretty ridiculous, considering he was about to go to prison. All right? Much like a lot of the other Black Panthers who ended up in prison. So there's that. But William O'Neill was not asked about that. And I had a really big problem when it came to this interview, because the interviewers were not at all interested in the inner workings of the Black Panther Party. They were far more fixated on William O'Neill and his handler. So that's my fourth point here. There was a lot of focus on Bill's relationship with his handler, Roy Mitchell. Considering how young and easily influenced all of the people in this story is, Hampton was in his early 20s, not much older than O'Neill at the time. They are trying to paint the picture of the FBI taking advantage of O'Neill, and they did. But he seems to have been genuinely close with Mitchell, at least during the operation. Now, this, of course, comes from, they replicated some of the scenes that he talked about in this interview in the movie, like him being invited to Roy Mitchell's house, him meeting his children, meeting Roy Mitchell's children. This is 1966, and Roy Mitchell is a white man, all right? And this white man is letting you in his house. He's giving you money. You get to meet his children. He's putting his entire career essentially in your hands. And throughout this interview, William O'Neill he's talking about how, he kind of looked up to Roy Mitchell. He kind of also contradicts himself. Like earlier, he says he wanted to be a policeman. when he was a kid, and then later on he said he never wanted to be a policeman. So that's one of those interesting bits. But that's what the interviewers are interested in. They're interested in the FBI and Roy Mitchell and William O'Neill. They're not interested in why the FBI would be interested in Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party in the first place. There's no conversation about that. There's very little, and he gives you stuff that you could follow up on, but they don't do that. My fifth point, the interviewers were not interested in any crimes the BPP engaged in. We know for a fact the BPP engaged in crimes like robberies, murders, and shootouts with the police, but Bill was never asked what he knew about these. Now, this is important stuff here. This is important. 2 police officers were murdered by the Black Panther Party while Bill O'Neill was in the Black Panther Party. Okay? He was never asked about that. Whether he was involved in it, whether he knew the guys who were involved in it, never asked. Okay? The Black Panthers would routinely rob residents. They were robbing the SDS / Weather Underground. They were robbing them. We're going to talk about that later. Matter of fact, let's talk about it right now. This is from the book Days of Rage. 1969. What page was that? Was that page 76? Let's see. I'm looking for the page. Okay, so they were robbing the weatherman for supplies. Oh yeah, page 76. I'm looking at page 75. All right. So it says, quote, this is from Brian Burroughs' book, Days of Rage. Another danger, though the leadership never publicized it, was the Panthers, whose offices were several blocks away. If SDS was a focus of police harassment, the Chicago Panthers were approaching open war with the police. Their derelict offices, meaning the SDS derelict offices, were regularly raided. Their members stopped and frisked on an hourly basis. The weathermen idolized the Panthers, but their relationship fastly deteriorated. Quote, the Panthers were in a stage of total madness. As the months went on, as they became more paranoid and more crazy, they took a lot of that out on us. To them, our offices were much bigger, much nicer than theirs. We had a lot of equipment and cars and the printing press. It rapidly developed into this rip-off relationship that was emotionally horrible. You couldn't dare question it politically. It was completely insane. This is what one of the members of the SDS is talking about, their relationship with the Black Panthers. Okay. Continuing, it says tensions climaxed when a group of Panthers stormed into the SDS office, jammed a gun into a girl's face, beat up the SDS printer Ron Fleigelman, and ransacked the office, making off with typewriters and other equipment. Afterward, Bernadine Dorn and others went to the Panthers' offices to complain, where Lerner says, we were basically kicked down the stairs. So you have this crazy pack of white communists who are idolizing the Black Panthers, providing them with all kinds of help, and the Panthers are robbing them. Okay? They're beating them up and taking their stuff. You know? They were beating them up and taking their stuff. All right? So this is very important. These questions never came up in this interview, and they almost never come up when you talk about the Chicago Panthers at all. So they were involved with all kinds of robberies. They were involved with crimes. They killed 2 police officers. Now let's talk about that, because that's incredibly important to the mythology around Fred Hampton. Okay? Now, Fred Hampton, let's be real, he was not involved with the murder of these 2 police officers. I want people to know that. right from the jump. Okay, he was not involved with this, but this happened under his watch because he was the big boss man of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. And I want to discuss this because it's extremely important, especially for the theory that I'm about to put out there about what happened with Fred Hampton. Okay. All right. So there were two police officers, Patrolman John Gilhooly and Frank Gershon Rappaport, both of whom were murdered November the 13th, 1969. Okay, so this is late 1969. All right, now remember, on the 26th, you got Fred Hampton he lost his appeal on the robbery case. And on the 4th of December, Fred Hampton is killed. Approximately 3 weeks before Fred Hampton is killed, two Chicago police officers are ambushed by Black Panthers and murdered. Okay, so let's talk about this. This is from the Officer Down Memorial page. Patrolman Frank Rappaport and Patrolman John Gilhooly were ambushed by members of the radical group Black Panthers on a false call of a man with a gun. As the officers entered a gangway between two buildings at 5824 South King Drive, the man opened fire with a shotgun from a porch below, striking Patrolman Rappaport in the chest and Patrolman Gilhooly in the face and neck. The subject then shot Patrolman Rappaport again as he lay on the ground, killing him. Patrolman Gilhooly was transported to Billings Hospital where he succumbed to his wounds the following day. One subject was shot and killed by other officers, and another was wounded. Two more escaped the scene. Patrolman Rappaport had served with the Chicago police for 3.5 years. Okay? So two police officers were murdered in November of 1969. Okay? Now, let's talk about this for a second, because we know two of the three men who were involved with the homicide. Okay, we know two of them. One of them died at the scene. The other one got away, but he was arrested later. Now, you can go to the Black Panthers. Well, all of their newspapers are online. Okay. Marxist.org can give you the entire list of Black Panther newspapers. So in the Black Panther, published Saturday, December 6th, 1969, 2 days after Fred Hampton was killed, it says, Jake Winters murdered by fascist pigs. So it says, Spurgeon Jake Winters, 19, member of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, paid the most the one can pay towards the liberation of oppressed people, his life. At 3:30 a.m., November the 13th, Jake was murdered in a shootout in Chicago where 3 pigs were killed and 7 were wounded. The shootout was precipitated by an ambush made by the Standing Army of Chicago, the Police Department, on an abandoned building at 5801 South Calumet, arriving in the scene with the armaments and men, more than 1,000 policemen, equipped with 12-gauge shotguns, M1 carbines, 357 Magnums, billy clubs, mace, tear gas, paddy wagons, helicopters, and K9 units. And you see how they are very much playing up what happened here, right? So he gets a full heroic write-up, and he was one of the people who killed these guys. They even got the dates wrong, all right? And they got the address wrong as well. So they got the dates wrong, they got the address wrong, but it doesn't matter. So the interesting bit is that they actually, well, they got the date right. I believe the date was right. They got the time wrong. Let me look at this site here, because this was, what was this date? November the 13th, 1969. Now, Rappaport was jumped, they said, at 5 p.m. Okay, and these guys said it was 3:30 a.m. So it's some issues there. But he gets a full heroic write-up, all right? Including a long live the spirit of Jake Winters. It says the race, point number 7 of our 10-point platform says we want an immediate end to police brutality and the murder of black people. On November the 13th, 1969, brother Jake Winters was felled by those dirty, treacherous creatures called pigs. The brother was a profound revolutionary. He worked 7 days a week for the people. He participated in the Black Panther Party free breakfast for children program and was helping contract the people's free medical clinic. November 13th, brother Jake was killed in the line of duty, serving the masses and defending the black community from the aggression of those murderous pigs who make mass interventions into our communities under the guise of law and order. The pigs who are on their weekly search and destroy mission to spread terror and murder and brutality throughout the black community departed with their pants down and their asses showing. This is how the Black Panthers write in their newspapers, by the way. If you read Black Panther newspapers, it's stuff like this literally all the time. It says, brother Jake immediately began to defend the black community against these Nazi stormtroopers of Nixon's fascist regime. He put his life on the line and dealt the pigs the biggest loss they have ever received since their defeat at the Henry Horter Houting projects. They're talking about this stuff like they're at war, right? There's victories and defeats. They don't look at these things like this is criminal behavior, right? You got a young man killed. This man was 19. He was a kid. He was 19. He got in a shootout with the police and killed. How was that benefiting the black community? This is what frustrates me about the Black Panthers. If you put out all the bullshit, all the social work garbage that they talk about, look at how many teenage black boys they got arrested and or murdered. This guy was killed. And they talk about it like they're playing chess. We lost the bishop, but we took their rooks. Let's continue. It says, brother Jake, a true revolutionary and a member of the Black Panther Party, was a public servant and a guardian of the liberties of the people. He showed the responsibility and the dedication of the Black Panther Party to the interest of the people in the oppressed communities. So with the spirit of the highest personification of the Black Panther Party as illustrated by the actions of brother Jake Winters, we intend to move forward to serve the masses and hold ourselves responsible to the people. But we're going to stop right there. There was no eulogy for this guy. You don't know anything about him outside of he was a Black Panther and he got killed fighting the cops. All that other gibberish, they didn't even have the decency and respect to talk about his family, what he did for a living, what kind of person he was. It was all about how he died serving the greater good. This is how leftists think about people. I try not to get into that tonight, but this is how they think about you. You're not a son, a potential father, a brother. All you are is a martyr for the program. That's it. So Spurgeon Jake Winters, he was one of the guys. He was the guy, allegedly, that killed Michael Rappaport. Okay? He was allegedly the guy who actually shot Michael Rappaport as he laid on the ground. Now, the other Black Panther, because there was at least 3 of them, was Lance Bell. All right. So he also gets a little piece of in here in the Black Panther newspaper. It says Brother Lawrence Bell, who was on the scene with Jake Winters when Daly's private army came into Black community to brutalize and murder our people, is being held for 2 counts of murder. We know he didn't do it. The pigs know he didn't do it. Witnesses on the scene Thursday, November 13th, say he didn't do it. The pigs are holding him because Brother Jake sent 3 of their slimy partners to cold storage and put 8 on the wounded list. The pigs don't like it when they lose. They are used to killing our people and getting away with it. Justifiable homicide. But this time they were caught. The masses were on the scene. Brother Lawrence was an eyewitness, and they want to kill him. They don't like for the people to see them commit crimes against Black people. These reactionary monsters think they are going to let them send Lawrence Bell to the electric chair. They are wrong, dead wrong. If they try to kill Lawrence Bell, we will release the armed wrath of 1,000 Jake Winters. We will set up 1,000 Henry Horners and set thousands of angry Black proletarians on them. The pigs don't like our people to be in a position to defend themselves. We don't give a fuck what they like. We intend to defend ourselves, and we don't care how many pigs are killed. We want them all killed. If you kill Lawrence Bell, you have to face the wrath of 1,000 Jake Winters. Again, this is how they think about you. We're going to kill you. We're at war. We're going to murder you. On and on and on with this shit, right? You would think this would be important information that that people would talk about. And nope, not talked about at all. It's rarely ever discussed. Rarely ever discussed. So it was a huge scene where a bunch of people got shot. People died. You know, people were killed. And they were not treated well. They didn't even get respect. So that's something that when you discuss what happened with Fred Hampton, and when the people are talking about this is what occurred. Now, Fred Hampton was not involved with this. Again, there's no evidence that Fred Hampton ordered this, that Fred Hampton had anything to do with Frank Rappaport and John Gilhooly being murdered. There's no evidence that Fred Hampton had anything to do with that. Okay? But we know that they were involved with the murder of police officers. We know they were involved in robberies. I just proved these things, right? Nobody ever talks about these things. But I just proved it with hard evidence. So my 6th point, to go back to my eyes on the prize comment, Bill feels remorse. It says, because Bill does not believe Fred Hampton was a bad guy, which he doesn't, he feels remorse for him being killed. But he absolves himself of it by saying the FBI weren't the killers. The Chicago police were. The interviewer seemed perplexed that Bill would make a distinction between the two, even though there is a clear separation of powers and jurisdiction between the two. This is also facts. When you talk about the murder of Fred Hampton, they always talk about how the FBI killed Fred Hampton. They did not. It was the Chicago police. Now, my conspiracy theory is this. Frank Rappaport was executed laying on the ground by Spurgeon Winters in November of 1969. Fred Hampton was murdered in his bed, December 1969. It was not to stop the rise of the Black Messiah. It was clear, cold retaliation. The cops were pissed that one of their guys got executed in the street. So they hunted down Fred Hampton and executed him in his bed to teach them a lesson. And he was the leader of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. That makes a lot more sense than whatever conspiracy theory that people have been coming up when it comes to Fred Hampton. If you read some, if I have to have a favorite Panther, it would be Huey Newton. Huey Newton almost never talks about Bobby. Talks about Fred Hampton. If you read, I got 2 of his books. One of them is Revolutionary Suicide. Good luck finding the name Fred Hampton in that book. And that book was released in the 70s, so Fred Hampton was already dead. There was another book called To Die for the People. Good luck finding Fred Hampton's name in that book. He talks more about George Jackson, the guy who wrote Blood in My Eye and Soledad Brother, because he got his 17-year-old brother killed. And Angela Davis was in on that. I think I've told that story before. If not, let me tell it now. George Jackson is a fucking thug who just learns how to write in prison. So he writes this book called Soledad Brother. And the prison, the oppressed of the people in the prison and all that kind of stuff becomes an issue now for the Black Panthers. George Jackson has a 17-year-old brother named Jonathan Jackson. And Jonathan Jackson is radicalized by his big brother. And he decides he's going to bust his big brother out of prison. Angela Davis allegedly, put it in quotations, supplies Jonathan Jackson with a weapon. Jonathan Jackson and a couple of other people storm a courthouse, take a judge hostage, and try to demand that George Jackson and others are freed from prison. This ends up in a shootout in which the judge is killed and 17-year-old Jonathan Jackson is killed. 17 years old. Why are they using children as shock troops? And this is why I don't feel such sympathy when people talk about 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds or whatever. Look at what a 17-year-old can do. And this was one of the reasons why Angela Davis got arrested later on, because they believed wholeheartedly that she provided the gun in that situation. But I think she ended up beating the case. Okay? There's tons of that free Angela Davis shit throughout all these books. There tons of that shit. Right? But every time you hear about a Black Panther being murdered, Bobby Hutton was 17. Most of these guys were college age, between 17 and 23. If they lived to be in their 30s, they probably died in disgrace. Okay? But there's a difference between the FBI and the Chicago police. The FBI, that is where we learn from books like Days of Rage, and also part of this was also in the COINTELPRO thing we're going to talk about later. They were interested in these Black nationalist groups, but they were mostly interested in how these organizations like the Black Panthers had any kind of crossover with either foreign governments and terrorist organizations. That was primarily what the FBI was looking into. All the crimes they were getting involved with, the local police chapters were supposed to take care of that stuff. Okay? So everybody always says there's no real difference between the FBI and the Chicago police. There is a vast difference. So my 7th point, which is my last one before I get into some other stuff, Bill's remorse is sensible. He spent a lot of time with these people. He got to know them, then betrayed them. A similar remorse or of sorts was felt by Joe Pistone, aka Donnie Brasco, who infiltrated the mob. Bill's job is not much different from that operation, which I said I kind of started this whole ramp with that thing, with that, right? Joey Pistone did feel bad because people got killed behind him infiltrating the mob, you know? And the mob seems to have a very much different response to being infiltrated than the Black Panther Party or the Civil Rights Movement or whatever, right? When you infiltrate the Black Panthers or the Civil Rights Movement or even the Ku Klux Klan, they have a victim narrative. Oh no, we're being oppressed. The feds, man, they're all up our ass, bro. But when it's the mob, they kind of like, okay, you got us. You know, like there's something unique about that, where they respect the ebb and flow of, we engage in criminal behavior and the police are going to try to stop us. That may mean they're going to try to get informants. It may mean they're going to put people in our ranks. You know, it may mean this or that. They know it's a game, and you know, they kind of know where they fit into that situation. Most of these other more politically connected groups, they are again looking at this like they're playing checkers or something. They don't take it seriously. There's no fundamental understanding that if you start talking about killing police officers and killing the president or killing senators or whatever, that's going to bring attention on you, and you're not going to like it. Okay, you can't talk about that kind of stuff in public and not get negative attention. And anybody who thinks that I'm, you know, caping for the government, look, I don't really care for the government. But I know that killing people ain't going to change your goddamn circumstances. Violent communist revolution is not going to change a motherfucking thing. On top, and then you just throw in more young people into the meat grinder. Communism is not freedom. All these people were delusional to think that they were fighting on behalf of the freedom of the people, man. You were begging the government that you claim to hate for free houses and food. You said you hated them. Why are you asking them for food? Why are you asking them to educate your children? You say you hated them. That's the kind of dumb shit that the Black Panthers was on. They were dumb. But a lot of them were very young. They were radicalized very young. You know, they were reading Mao and they were dealing with, you know, Vietnam and all that kind of stuff. You can give them some kind of grace when it comes to that. But you don't ask the government that you say that you hate to take care of you and your people. That just doesn't make sense. That's what they were doing. You know? I lost my train of thought. Okay. The Black Panthers, okay, so they got infiltrated. So now my last point was other prominent FBI informants, such as Julia Brown and Manning Johnson, explain how these, quote, civil rights organizations are just fronts for communist agitation. Bill confirmed that the BPP was more of the same. These groups were organized and funded by foreign agents, and they got a lot of Black people killed and arrested unnecessarily. Now, you may say, how do you prove that? Well, Huey Newton admitted that he would go to Cuba. Going to Cuba was a big deal for leftist revolutionaries in the 60s. Bernardine Dorn knew revolutionaries from Cuba in the 60s, and she was regularly in conversation with Fred Hampton and the Chicago Panthers. This is the kind of stuff that the FBI is interested in, right? Because Bernardine Dorn is a crazy bitch. Her and the Weathermen would go around the country setting shit on fire and blowing stuff up. That's what the federal government is paying attention to. But the FBI, as usual, is incompetent and they couldn't catch them. So we can go through that one day, but that's in the book Days of Rage. Okay. So to me, it doesn't make sense that they were trying to stop the rise of the Black Messiah by killing Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton was not going to be a Black Messiah. Fred Hampton was going to prison because he got convicted of robbing a ice cream truck. So Fred Hampton, of course, got a full write-up, and he got the cover of the Black Panther News Service. The next week, December 13th, 1969, the week after they mentioned Jake Winters in this newspaper, they mentioned Fred Hampton. Okay? So there's a full page write-up on Fred Hampton. Let's read some of this. Deputy Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois chapter has joined the ranks of martyrs, revolutionary heroes like Lumumba, Malcolm X, Little Bobby Hutton, Bunchy Carter, John Higgins, Che, Torre, Jake Winters, and the countless other revolutionaries who have given the most precious gift that they could give in the name of the people. These brothers and sisters gave their lives in order that you and yours may one day enjoy true freedom and the best that technology can provide. Eldridge Cleaver, Minister of Information, has stated that, quote, it is time to intensify the struggle, and that now is the time for, quote, madmen. Deputy Chairman Fred Hampton was just such a madman. Reactionaries wondered why Deputy Chairman Fred waged such a resolute struggle, seemingly against the greatest of odds. Reactionary cultural nationalists had forgotten Malcolm's words. Malcolm thundered that we are a generation that don't give a fuck about the odds. Deputy Chairman Fred saw through the bullshit. He saw the corruption, poverty, and bankruptcy of capitalism in America. He saw and experienced the hunger, the pain, the agony, and the death that is part and parcel of the American way of life. Deputy Chairman Fred checked out history and learned the very nature of this decadent fascist society, which was conceived in the genocide of the red man. Deputy Chairman Fred dug that vulturistic capitalists were growing fat off the flesh and the blood of the toiling of the masses. So Deputy Chairman dedicated his life to destroying the number one enemy of mankind. The American government supports and carries out the death-dealing policy of the vulturistic, greedy capitalists. This government was created to serve and protect the interests of slave owners and growing Yankee capitalist bandits who made their family fortunes by robbing workers of the fruits of their labor. Food, clothing, decent housing, medical treatment, and the right of self-determination, etc. Capitalists are denying the people their right to exist through various devious means. Exorbitant prices for commodities necessary in life, and under the cover of law and order, which give their fascist pigs plan open season on those who would change this society. Oh. This evil fascist government deprives the people of their lives and is even attempting to murder our unborn. They call it birth control. Amazing, right? They're against birth control. The Black Panthers are against birth control. While the vile, vulturistic capitalists make huge fortunes off this policy, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Deputy Chairman Fred understood the nature of our class enemy and knew what must be done. From the correct teaching of Huey P. Newton and the Central Committee, Deputy Chairman Fred moved to establish revolutionary political power for the people by any means necessary. Deputy Chairman Fred dealt with the enemy under the guise of our fearless Deputy Chairman. The Illinois chapter expanded and grew. Socialist programs, people's programs, were implemented by the Illinois chapter and the people. The leadership of the Deputy Chairman has won support and love all the oppressed people for our party. We loved and respected Deputy Chairman Fred, as did the people whom he served so selflessly. He stood up in the midst of the fascist Gestapo forces and declared, "I am a revolutionary." This is the spirit of Deputy Chairman Fred. By raising their hands against Deputy Chairman Fred, they lifted their hands against the best that humanity possesses. And already other hands are reaching out, picking up the guns. Fascist pigs and mindless puppets of USA fascism and the arm of the oppressed is long, and their vengeance is terrifying. Long live the spirit of fearless Chairman Fred. Dare to struggle, dare to win. End. Whew. Not one talk about his family. His girlfriend was apparently pregnant at the time. You wouldn't have known that reading this shit. That was the entire piece that they put out on Fred Hampton. You don't know when his birthday was. You didn't know whether he was a brother. He have brothers and sisters. He have other children. You don't know. Where was he educated? You would think they would know something about this guy. They didn't print none of that. None of that was important. Who he was as a person was not important. He was a martyr for their program. End of story. That's it. That's all you ever are. You're not a person. That is deeply problematic for somebody like me who takes their own life very seriously. He was only 21 years old. He was only 21, man. And now he's dead. He died. Killed by the police in some phony fucking struggle dreamed up by some dudes in Oakland. Ain't that about a bitch? Right? Okie dokie. Let's get into this COINTELPRO thing. We're about to wrap this part up. Then we get into Daredevil. How about that? So COINTELPRO, as a program, it started in August of 1967. At least that's what the paperwork says. It was launched in pretty much every major city in the United States: Atlanta, Baltimore, Boston, Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, Cincinnati, Houston, Indianapolis. I'm not reading all of them. Los Angeles, Memphis, New Orleans, New York, Philadelphia, Sacramento, San Francisco, obviously the Bay Area is where they are originally from. And they they sent this paperwork to all of the special agents in charge, the SACs, to all of these various cities to tell them about the COINTELPRO program. So the federal government says goals for maximum effectiveness of the counterintelligence program and to prevent wasted effort, long-range goals are being set. 1, prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups. In unity, there is strength, a truism that is no less valid for all its triteness. An effective coalition of black nationalist groups might be the first step towards a real Mau Mau in America, the beginning of a true black revolution. Now, the Mau Mau were, I believe, a guerrilla group in Kenya, if I remember correctly. I didn't write that down. I remember reading about it, I think in a Frantz Fanon book or something like that. But they had led like a bloody revolution in some African country. Okay, and that's essentially where the idea for combining all these groups were about. So the second point is the point you've heard all the time: prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Malcolm X might have been such a messiah. He is the martyr of the movement today. The Black Panther Party was actually founded shortly after the death of Malcolm X. And much like the extremely white Weathermen group who idolized the Black Panthers idolized Malcolm X. All right. It says Malcolm X might have been such a messiah. He is the martyr of the movement today. Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, and Elijah Muhammad all aspired to this position. Elijah Muhammad is less of a threat because of his age. King could be a very real contender for this position should he abandon his supposed quote-unquote obedience to quote-unquote white liberal doctrines of nonviolence and embrace black nationalism. Carmichael has the necessary charisma to be a threat in this way. Now, Stokely Carmichael ran SNCC for the students of I'm trying to read it off the top of my head. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Now, Stokely Carmichael, at this point in time in 1967, I think he was even around during the Freedom Rise, I think, with Martin Luther King and all that. But Stokely Carmichael was also a violent revolutionary. He would bump heads with Huey Newton and the Black Panthers as well, because he favored violent revolution. Huey wrote in one of his books that Stokely Carmichael came to see him in jail and promised to break him out, but it was going to take armed struggle to do so. And Huey told him not to do it because that's not what he was about. You know, there was a very, very much a tug of war between those who would be social workers and those who would be gunslinging Rambos in the Black Panther Party. All right. Stokely Carmichael was one of those really radical types. He wrote a book called Black Power, which I think popularized the term Black Power. Maybe one day, once I go through that book again, we'll sit down and talk about it. But Stokely Carmichael was a really big player at this time. He doesn't get a lot of credit. They don't talk about him a lot. But I think he was the one who actually created the term Black Panther, or at least he drew the logo or something like that. And the guys in Oakland took it. And that was another big issue between him and them, is he felt like he was the original Black Panther and they were stealing his shit and all that kind of stuff. But Stokely Carmichael also did not like Martin Luther King, because Martin Luther King was not as radical as Stokely Carmichael was. And Elijah Muhammad, of course, was the founder of the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam was founded in Detroit, but the guy W.D. Fard Muhammad, he had come from Chicago, where he was a member of the radical group known as I just lost it. The Moorish Science Temple. So the Moorish Science Temple was created in Chicago under Noble Drew Ali. W.D. Fard Muhammad was a member of that group. He goes to Detroit. He meets Elijah Muhammad. He teaches Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad then goes on to found the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam is considered a black nationalist group. Of course, they give birth to Malcolm X. Malcolm X is the god of Huey Newton and all of these guys. So that's why the Nation of Islam is here. Okay? Just trying to make it make sense to you. And Elijah Muhammad is very old at this point in time. All right, he's an old man. Of course, this paper was written after Malcolm X died, because Malcolm X was killed in 1965. February of 65, if I remember correctly. So Martin Luther King is not dead yet. 3, prevent violence on the part of black nationalist groups. This is of primary importance, as is, of course, a goal of our investigative activity. It should also be the goal of the counterintelligence program. Through counterintelligence, it should be possible to pinpoint potential troublemakers and neutralize them before they exercise their potential for violence. Now, it should be noted that the Ku Klux Klan is in this document. They're not a focus. The focus is on the black nationalist groups. But the Ku Klux Klan were definitely a concern at this time. And by what they mean by neutralize troublemakers, either they mean to isolate them. If they wanted to kill them, they would have just killed them. And arrest them or turn people against them or whatever. This is what a lot of disinformation from the FBI would come from. If the FBI didn't like somebody, or if they saw somebody that they were like, I don't know what's going on with that guy, they would put out dirty stories on them. One of them was Bayard Rustin, who was the gay communist that hung out with Martin Luther King. They didn't like him very much. So they of course, they promised that they would tell the world that him and Martin Luther King were lovers in order to get Martin Luther King to get him to quit. even though he still didn't quit. He just kind of faded back. He took a couple of steps back, and it really took a while to get him out of there. But that's why they were collecting so much information on Martin Luther King, right? To put out disinformation or to build up exposés. But they pretty much had this stuff on everybody, all right? Part of the COINTELPRO program. Part 4, prevent militant Black nationalist groups and leaders from gaining respectability by discrediting them to 3 separate segments of the community. The goal of discrediting Black nationalists must be handled tactically in 3 ways. You must discredit these groups and individuals. First, the responsible Negro community. Second, they must be discredited to the white community. Both the responsible community and the liberals who have vestiges of sympathy for Black nationalist militant groups simply because they are Negroes. Third, these groups must be discredited in the eyes of Negro radicals, the followers of the movement. The last area requires entirely different tactics from the first 2. Publicity about violent tendencies and radical statements merely enhance Black nationalists to the last group. It adds respectability in a different way. Now, this is very important because all of these people are different, right? All these people are different. Let's just use the people that they have listed. If you wanted to discredit Martin Luther King, okay, he is not a radical. He is a Christian preacher, right? So saying that he's having gay sex orgies or gay orgies, he's hanging around with communists, that's not going to bother anybody. It doesn't even bother anybody today that he was palling around with communists, right? Nobody even cares about that today. They wouldn't have cared about it then either, right? But the fact that he was having affairs, sleeping around, that kind of stuff, that he could have possibly have been gay, boom, that would have killed King with the Black church. It would have killed everything that he had built up in terms of respectability to the public, especially the white community and the good Black people who were giving money to the civil rights movement. It would have ended Martin Luther King completely if they could prove it, of course. Not exactly the same thing for other people. Elijah Muhammad, we all know that he was having affairs. He was having sex with teenage girls and stuff. That's why Malcolm X left. But he also leads a cult, so they made excuses for his behavior, right? But that was a point of discrediting him. 9 times out of 10, I'm almost certain that a Fed told Malcolm X about all these children that Elijah Muhammad was having with young women. I'm almost certain a Fed told him that. It's true, but I'm almost certain that somebody had to tell him that. I don't think he would have been paying attention. But Stokely Carmichael, he was a radical. So saying that Stokely Carmichael was going to engage in violent revolutions, that would not have destroyed his credibility, even though it kind of did. See, the FBI didn't know everything, right? They're making a lot of assumptions because they don't know everybody and all the players. But Huey Newton was not in favor of a lot of that violent government overthrow shit. He said that the mission of the Black Panther Party was to provide programs and services to the communities. That's what he wanted to do. He was one of the social worker types, okay? He always frowned at the Eldridge Cleaver, Stokely Carmichael, let's grab guns and shoot police officers gimmick. He didn't like that. That didn't mean he didn't participate. It just means that he tried to avoid that kind of thing because he knew it brought a lot of attention. Again, he is the intellectual core of the Black Panther Party, right? He's the guy who came up with a lot of the stuff that ended up floating, to and fro around the country. But you can't do anything once you give people the knowledge and they take it and do whatever they want with it, right? So Stokely Carmichael was very off-putting to Huey Newton, and a lot of the radicals, very, very radical people were. Stokely Carmichael was very off-putting to Martin Luther King, right? So there was going to be a certain level of respectability Stokely Carmichael was not going to be able to get because he was off-putting to even radicals like Huey, and definitely off-put to relative conservatives like Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was a progressive. but he wasn't a radical nut job like Stokely Carmichael, right? And Elijah Muhammad, it's difficult to tell where he would have sat on that, but I don't think he would have been for armed socialist revolution, overthrowing the country and all that. I don't think he would have gone down with that. He probably would have been able to smart enough to see, like, he didn't even want Malcolm X to offend the Kennedys. You know, the Kennedys were very, very close with Martin Luther King and all them. That's why Elijah Muhammad did not want Malcolm X to offend the Kennedys when JFK got shot, because he knew that John F. Kennedy, was a quote unquote friend of the civil rights movement, was regularly in conversation with Martin Luther King, was one of the people working on the civil rights bills, was applying pressure to Southern governments to desegregate. That was John Kennedy. So Elijah Muhammad did not want Malcolm X pissing off the Kennedys and the people who were high up, able in a position politically to help black people. He didn't want that, and Malcolm X did it anyway, of course, because he was doing him, you know. He was feeling himself, and so he did that. Part 5, it says a final goal should be to prevent the long-range growth of militant black nationalist organizations, especially among the youth. Specific tactics to prevent these groups from converting young people must be developed. So they don't even have, at the time of the creation of COINTELPRO, how they were going to prevent people from getting involved with these groups. So they have a list of organizations that they want to tackle. Notice who's missing in this conversation. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, which was headed by Stokely Carmichael. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was, of course, headed by Martin Luther King. The Revolutionary Action Movement, or RAM, which I believe they were headed by Eldridge Cleaver. Was it Eldridge Cleaver, or was it H. Rap Brown? I don't know. Anyway, the Nation of Islam, which of course is headed by Elijah Muhammad. It says officers handling these cases and those of Stokely Carmichael of SNCC, H. Rap Brown of SNCC. Okay, so H. Rap Brown was part of that. Maxwell Stanford. Okay, that's one. Okay, all right. Martin Luther King of SELC and Elijah Muhammad should be alert for counterintelligence suggestions. Now, if you read this black extremist thing, it's like 100 and some odd pages, but they pay attention to everything. When Martin Luther King and Elijah Muhammad had a conversation in Chicago, the feds knew about it. Okay, they knew, they documented it, because these are the people that they're watching. But notice, there is no Black Panther Party on here, and the Black Panthers has existed for a year at this point in time, almost a year, about 10 months. All right, and there's no Fred Hampton. He's not even on their radar. Now, notice what I said earlier. Fred Hampton doesn't really even appear in any of Huey's writings, as he writes eulogies for like George Jackson and Jonathan Jackson. He's writing about Bobby Hutton and all the other Panthers who gave their lives. He doesn't really mention none of these guys that died in Chicago. He can't mention everybody, of course, but you think that if Fred Hampton was extremely important to the Black Panther Party, they would have mentioned him. They didn't. He almost never talks about Fred Hampton. Why? He was supposed to be the Black Messiah. No. Nope. So there's so much stuff to go through here. There's so much, and I didn't think this was going to be an hour and a half. I really didn't, because I didn't expect to read all of those Black Panther papers. But once I got in the mood, man, it was over. So I liked the movie. At the end of the day, I thought the movie was good. You know, at the end of the day, I thought the movie was quite good. I'm going to be reading more Black Panther stuff. I'm going to end up getting Elaine Brown's book. She was one of Huey's lieutenants, and I know I'm gonna have to read a lot of feminist garbage to get through that, but I'm gonna read it anyway. I may end up getting Bobby Seale's book again later too. But I read. It's hard to read everything Black Panthers because a lot of it is just again straight up commie propaganda. There's only so much of that garbage you can put in your head, you know. As long as you know what the major members, Stokely Carmichael, Huey Newton, Eldridge Cleaver, as long as you know what those people think, you pretty much covered when it comes to the Black Panthers. And I've read Soul on Ice. I've read Soledad Brother, which is George Jackson's book. I've read things that Huey has written. And I've read is there something? Oh yeah, I read 2 Huey books. I haven't read anything on Fred Hampton. I haven't read a single book on Fred Hampton. I don't feel like I need to. All right. So he wasn't that important. He is a martyr, and all the martyrs are important to the people in the program. But in the grand scheme of things, the government was more concerned about his relationship with the white terrorists. That's what they came to Chicago for. As a matter of fact, I'm going to prove that to you as well, because I don't want people thinking I'm just disrespectful to Fred Hampton, who by all means I don't dislike. He's not one of the Panthers I dislike, but this is one of the important bits. It says, Weatherman, this is from Days of Rage by Brian Burrow. Weatherman has been on the FBI's radar since its inception. This is from page 71. Months before his leader began planning a campaign of underground violence, the FBI sensed the threat it posed. In September 1989, J. Edgar Hoover's right-hand man, William Sullivan, warned that Weatherman, quote, had the potential to be far more damaging to the security of the nation than the Communist Party ever was, even at the height of its strength in the 1930s. That's why they were in Chicago, because the Black Panthers were partnering up with Weatherman. Weatherman is Weather Underground, the group that was blowing up buildings during the 1970s. That's what the federal government was hovering around Chicago about. Trying to stop the rise of a Black Messiah, sure, but also there's fucking terrorists there. All right? There's fucking nut jobs like Bernadine Dorn there. Bernadine Dorn was so fucking crazy. She was too crazy for Fred Hampton. Believe it or not. I'm about to read this. This is also from the book Days of Rage. From outside itself, thought that any of this, especially the Days of Rage, made any sense. When Mark Rudd met with leaders of the group that organized the largest mass protest of the era, the National Mobilization Committee, or MOBE, they adamantly refused to join forces, arguing that street fighting and battling police were counterproductive. The Panthers, too, thought the Days of Rage was a bad idea. The Chicago Panthers' charismatic young leader, Fred Hampton, held shouting matches with Bernadine Dorn and other leaders. The Panthers refused to help, and Hampton actually went public with his opposition, calling the Days of Rage Custeristic. What was the Days of Rage, by the way? Most people don't want to know what the fuck is that. It was an event where the Students for Democratic Society, or the SDS, engaged in open warfare with the police, engaging in fighting and brawling with the cops. All right? This is what they wanted to do. All right? I'm about to read what the Days of Rage was. It says, Weatherman got together for a massive protest planned for October, in which the new, far larger group would make its political debut, storming the streets of Chicago in an all-out attack on the police and symbols of government authority. They billed it the National Action, but in time it will become known as the Days of Rage. There were 500 members of the Students for Democratic Society, and Weatherman had 500 members. 500 members. And they were planning open warfare with the police, to the point where even Fred Hampton himself was like, whoa, y'all are crazy. And look, the SDS is made up of mostly college-age, middle-class white people, most of whom, of course, are Jews. Most of whom, of course, are Jews. But that wasn't it. Let's go to page 225, because this is very interesting. I want people to realize how close the Black Panthers were to Weatherman and the Weather Underground. Dennis Cunningham. Here's another one. A Chicago attorney, Dennis Cunningham. Cunningham, as we have seen, emerged. Blah blah blah. Where was that? What am I looking for here? Was it page 225? It is page 225. Let's see. Okay, this is where Bernadine Doran stole this guy named Dennis Cunningham. She stole his wife. Okay, the Weathermen were degenerates. They were having orgies and carrying on, and they didn't believe in monogamy and all that kind of stuff. So she basically took this guy's wife, but she was his friend. And this Dennis Cunningham, he was one of the lawyers for Fred Hampton. So that's how close these groups were. That one of Bernadine Dorans, who was the leader of, one of the leaders of Weatherman, one of the most prominent members, one of her friends ended up being Fred Hampton's attorney. And she then stole that guy's wife and turned her out. And basically, they were using her and her baby to plant bombs, by the way. So that's what the fuck they were doing. So the FBI had multiple reasons to be in Chicago, not just for Fred Hampton, right? There's crazy white people in that town. There's crazy niggas in that town. And there's gangbangers in that town too. Because I've said the name Jeff Fort a couple of times, haven't I? Jeff Fort created a group called the Black Peastone Rangers, or the Almighty Black Peastone Nation. They would later become El Rukin, which means the foundation. I'm doing this from memory, by the way. Jeff Fort converted to the Moorish Science Temple and then became a fucking terrorist. All right. He ended up in prison pretty much. I think he's still alive. He ended up in prison because he was trying to buy nuclear weapons or something like that to wage war in the United States on the behalf of Libya. He was in contact with foreign governments. Similarly, this would be much later on, though, about 30 years later, Louis Farrakhan tried to accept money from Libya. And the federal government got in and was like, what are you talking about? What are you doing? Are they going to give you all these millions of dollars for what? Because they had already busted Jeff Fort doing this shit. Interesting bit. You can Google this if you want. You can Google all this shit if you want. Jeff Fort and the Black Peastone Rangers were given a federal grant of $1.4 million for a jobs program. So you thought they were the government was just racist, right? But they gave a gangbanger money for a jobs program. And of course he used it to buy guns. So, so of course he used it to buy guns. So there, uh, uh, I need to find out how much was that grant, because I want to make sure I got the right number. It was a $1 million federal grant. He got a federal grant from him. Oh, it was 1.4 million. I was right. Okay, this is from Chicago Magazine. Let's take a look at this. This is one of the people that you see in the movie. They're trying to. Huey Newton is trying to meet up with and join up with. It's Jeff Fort, who is a fucking psycho. But he was also very young. He was like 19 or 20 or something like that when he created this group. So he was a pretty young man himself. But he ended up being a goddamn psychopath. All right. Let's see. I'm looking for the actual information here. Where is it? So he met up with a social worker named Ed Wood, right, in 1963. So this was before he had even participated in anything at this point in time, and they were watching the neighborhood as it increased and all this kind of stuff. And at this point, he's of course running the gang called the Blackstone Rangers. Okay. Um, I'm trying to figure out, when did he get? Oh, here it is. It was 1967. So 2 years before Fred Hampton was killed. It says in 1967, two radically different solutions to the gang violence were advanced. The police created a 10-man gang intelligence unit to break up the gangs, and a fledgling black community group called the Woodlawn Association, the Woodlawn Organization, I'm sorry, got a $927,000 federal grant to start a gang-run jobs program that would provide classes to 800 Rangers and gangster disciples. That's one of them, but I don't think that one was given to Jeff Fort. There was one that gave to Jeff Fort directly. I'm trying to figure out where that one is. And he blew that money, just like when the federal government, or was it the state, gave $1 million to the Black Panthers and their equally psychotic Puerto Rican friends for that clinic in New York, and they blew all that money away. Here it is. Jeff Fort was found guilty of conspiring to misapply federal funds and was sentenced to 5 years in Leavenworth. He had been paid a total of was that 1,000? Oh, it's 1,000. How much was the grant though? I must have passed it up. Okay, never mind. I just want to read this part then. It don't matter. It said Jeff Fort was found guilty of conspiring to misapply federal funds and was sentenced to 5 years in Leavenworth. He had been paid a total of $1,467 as a center chief. The Woodlawn organization, for its part, never did spend all of its grant money, turning back an estimated $200,000 to the federal government. By conservative estimate, barely 1/3 of the $927,000 grant had gone to the Blackstone Rangers. But these details were quickly forgotten. Over time, whenever the jobs program was mentioned, all anyone could remember was that Jeff Fort had conned the U.S. government out of $1 million. Don't let anybody tell you that they were just living in abject depression. Jeff Fort was running a fucking gang, and the government gave him $1 million. The Black Panthers, and I forget what the name of that Puerto Rican group is, they took over a hospital, and they were given $1 million. And in each situation, they blew it. They blew it. These guys had an opportunity to be the revolutionaries that they wanted to be. that they prayed that they would be. And they just turned out to be lazy fucking knuckleheads, not ready for the job that they claimed that they wanted. They were not ready to be saviors and messiahs and all that shit. They were dipshits. Excuse my language. So Jeff Fort, I believe, is still in prison. Yeah, he's still alive. He was born in 1947. How old is he now? He's 78. His name now is Abdul Malik Kaba. So there's that. That's the guy who, when you see the pool hall room and Fred Hampton is talking to Jeff Fort, there it is. That's Jeff Fort. The government gave him $1 million. He gave it to the gang members. He didn't provide one fucking job. And why is it? And I want to close this subject on this here, because some people will still say, you know, maybe if Fred Hampton would have lived, maybe all of these people would have been, you know, they would have been fine, man. The violence would have been able to stop all this stuff. Understand, why aren't these people talking about uniting with the businessmen? They're not trying to unite with the business owners. They're not trying to unite with the homeowners. They're not trying to unite with the teachers, the professors, the people who go to community college. They're uniting gangs. Why are they uniting gangs? Because they want to have a violent revolution. That's why they're uniting gangs. There was no real social benefit to what they were trying to do. They weren't trying to unite nurses and teachers and these kinds of people because they wanted to run a clinic. You're trying to run a free clinic here. Okay, well, you need to be uniting some nurses, right? You need to be uniting some doctors, some pharmacists. But all I hear about is you going to meet gang members. Ain't no pharmacists in the Blackstone Rangers, brother. I can guarantee you that. Jeff Ford is not no goddamn doctor. You know what I'm saying? But people don't think about these things this way. They don't ask why does all of the unification have to be negative? And this is what they were concerned about the federal government when it comes to Martin Luther King. Because Martin Luther King brought together the business people, the wealthy white liberals, the wealthy black people, wealthy Negroes. Harry Belafonte was giving money to the civil rights movement. Sammy Davis Jr., other sort of rich white liberals were giving money. All the rich white liberals who were giving money to the Black Panther Party were doing so behind the cover of darkness. All right. They didn't want anybody knowing that they were giving money to armed revolutionaries. But Martin Luther King, absolutely, they go on TV and talk about that because he was seen as a good man. That's the difference. Martin Luther King was the black messiah they were talking about, not fucking Fred Hampton. Okay. You said Jeff Fort got 168 years. He's a terrorist. Yes, he got 168 years. They tried to buy like a nuclear weapon or some shit. Like they tried to buy some missiles or something. Like he's an idiot, bro. Like these are not scholars. These people are not that smart. Most of them aren't anyway. No matter how much I may question anything about Martin Luther King, and I do question a lot of Martin Luther King because he used kids as shock troops as well. Even though he was resistant to doing it, he did it. And by that, I mean like in Birmingham, knowing that Bull Connor was going to whip out dogs and fire hoses and all that kind of stuff, they put teenagers out there to get brutalized and beaten and bitten by dogs and all that. They put teenagers out there. That was part of their tactic. That's disgusting. But at the very least, he wasn't trying to get them killed. right? The Panthers were getting people killed. And then giving them glowing write-ups in the newspaper once they got killed. 19 years old. Spurgeon Winters murdered a police officer and got a write-up in the goddamn newspaper. The Black Panthers newspaper, rather. It's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed. If the Black Panthers were just about free programs, I wouldn't even have a problem with it. The vision of the Black Panthers as laid out by Huey Newton is not that bad. It's obviously socialistic and it's obviously they're communists, but the idea of going out, getting into police or getting into fights with the cops and all that kind of stuff was not something he thought was useful to the mission of the Black Panther Party. And he said that repeatedly. He hated the cops. He was all for carrying guns and everything, which I don't have a problem with that. But he was not in favor of turning the Black Panther Party into an army. He was not in favor of that. He didn't think that was useful. And he has gone on record and written with his own hand that he didn't like that stuff. Everything that I know about Fred Hampton says that he didn't like that stuff. Even when it came to him robbing the ice cream truck, he still didn't use a gun. He just held the guy down so other people could take the ice cream. Allegedly, even though he was convicted. But Huey Newton had assaulted a bunch of people. I think he beat up a prostitute. He had pistol whipped some guys. He was a thug too. But he was sort of the intellectual core of the Black Panther Party. None of these people were angels, right? It's just some of them were worse than others. Like Fred Hampton and Huey Newton were not nearly as bad as, Eldridge Cleaver. Hey, Eldridge Cleaver is a fucking rapist. And everybody knew it because he wrote it in his book. He admitted to it. Psycho. Absolute psycho. But the Panthers often covered for each other because they knew each other were criminals. They just didn't care. Okay. We'll talk about Daredevil next week, I guess, because it's almost 10 o'clock. The Hispanic gang was called the Young Lords. Okay, that makes sense. Jeff Fort was a Black People Stone Ranger. He was the founder of the Black Stone Rangers, one of the co-founders. And they were talking about him. Meeting up with Fred Hampton. Oh shit. He probably would have murdered Fred Hampton himself. How do you feel about Huey Newton? I think if you read enough Huey Newton, you will be sympathetic to the Black Panthers. I think he writes very well. He's very intelligent. He's very well read, but it's all socialist garbage. So, take it with a grain of salt. But he's as radical as everybody else. But Huey Newton is not a racist. He doesn't dislike white people. He doesn't even want to distance himself from white people. He's not a homophobe either. He was one of the first people to say that maybe we should let the gays in. Maybe we should, pay attention to the struggle of the gays. He wasn't a misandrist either. He was the closest thing to a modern day progressive you'll find in the Black Panthers. One of the closer ones. He was okay with the gays. He wasn't all about it though. Like he wasn't going to rant and rave about the gays and the women and all that stuff, but he respected it. If that stuff came up, he was able to say, okay, they have a point. But he still expected to be, the boss and rule with an iron fist. And then he became was it heroin that he was on? It was heroin or cocaine. It was one of the two. And that's how he ended up getting killed. And of course, that ended up being a big conspiracy theory too, that the federal government killed Huey Newton. Why would you kill a guy when he's not even important anymore? He was a washout at that point. The Black Panther Party didn't even have any strength at all before Huey had even gotten killed. They were fucking pointless at that point. But he had pretty much ruined his life too. I'm surprised he wasn't one of the people who ended up in the government. You know, guys like Bobby Rush ended up in the government, but not Huey Newton, which was very strange, very peculiar. Najee Savage says, didn't the Black Panthers rape and kill their own member thinking she was a spy? They did that to a lot of people. They killed quite a few guys thinking they were snitches. They were known for purging. And that was actually in the movie, believe it or not. But the interesting bit is in the movie, they tried to say that the guy who killed the supposed spy was a spy himself. There's tons of stories about Black Panthers luring other Black Panthers into spots where they can kill them, chopping up their bodies and throwing them in the garbage, and all that kind of stuff, man. Just real evil shit. They were forcing girls to prostitute. They were abusing them. All kinds of stuff, man. They were doing all kind of crazy shit because it was a gang. That's really what it boiled down to. No matter how smart or how, I guess you could say, soft the intellectual elites, the Fred Hamptons and the Huey Newtons were, the hard heads are which was the majority of the gang, of the group. Then that was by design. That's what Huey wanted. But he thought he could control them. But he couldn't. You don't know what these Negroes are doing. You're giving them black jackets, berets, and guns, and then telling them, go watch the cops and look for, cops to engaging in terrorism on the citizens. It's going to be your responsibility to stop that. And everybody's like, oh, you want me to go fight the cops? That's not what I said, but that's what people go and do, right? Because you're not there. They're gonna make the call on their own. And the amount of police officers that were ambushed, like the cops that were ambushed in Chicago, that kind of stuff happened a lot, especially during the riots. There would be, I think there was Cleveland where there were snipers on top of the buildings shooting at the cops, lured the cops into some kind of project and started shooting at them. It's psychotic, man. It's absolutely psychotic. It's that was bad. That's some really bad shit. So I would suggest if you want to know about the Black Panthers, you probably should read Huey's books. Read anything if you want, but you have to remember that you're reading their propaganda. So they're going to talk about how, we were just good people trying to do free breakfast programs and free clinics, man. And then the government came out of nowhere and started shooting at us for no reason. It's like, get the fuck out of here. Like, get bent. Nobody has ever been killed just because you had a free clinic. Did you steal the medicine? Because how did you afford it? And that's one of the things that always pops up in these Panther stories. Nobody ever talks about where they got money from, because they stole a lot of it. They stole a lot of supplies. They did get donations occasionally, but most of these people have never had a real job in their lives. They were fresh out of college or fresh out of jail, and they were Black Panthers. They didn't have a job. So where did you have money from? Where do you get money from? You might have been able to go and beg, but you're not going to have money to run a free breakfast program off of pissy donations from the Black community of like $5 or $10. Because years prior to that, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference were getting $200,000, and they were running out of money almost immediately. They were running out of money all the time because they were using it as the bail fund. That's where the bail fund ideas came from. They got it from the Civil Rights Movement. But these guys are talking about feeding all these children, free housing, free medicine, and all this stuff. So where's the money coming from? Where are the pills and all this stuff for your free clinic coming from? Where is the tape coming from? The gauze, the Band-Aids. Where's all that stuff coming from? Most of these things were mobile. Like they had a van or something. So how are you putting gas in that thing? This is how you know they were criminals. Where else did the money come from? Even when it comes to the weathermen, when they went underground, started doing all these bombings and shit, most of them had rich parents. They knew rich people. They could just call somebody on the phone and get a nice little donation to cover them over for a while. The Black Panthers didn't have that. You're not going to find a Black Panthers documentary that is going to tell the truth. They are the most lionized group, up there with the civil rights movement, the most lionized group of people in the world. Good luck trying to find a Black Panthers documentary that discuss all the shit that I've been discussing on this channel about the Black Panthers. Good luck. Because I can guarantee you it eventually comes to police brutality, free breakfast program. That's pretty much all it is. They wanted to have a free breakfast program, bro. Okay. Okay. Look, if that was all it was, man, I'd have been supportive. Because I don't think you should be I don't think free healthcare is a good idea, from the government. Now, if somebody wants to start up their own private practice and run off donations and take walk-ins and all that, go for it. There are there's free clinics all over Detroit. Nobody's ever shot one up. Nobody's ever been arrested for running a free clinic. So that's how you know that ain't the problem. There's soup kitchens all over the place who give away free food. The cops have never busted it down and arrested people for running a free breakfast program. This just doesn't make sense. There's more to it than that. There's got to be more to it than that. And you don't have to be a statist to think that way. It's just common sense. Because then you have to explain how all these people weren't shot and killed. How weren't all of these people beat up and arrested? Why was it only people like Fred Hampton? And a lot of the women survived. I haven't read Asada Shakur's book either. I just don't care about her that much. But I'm gonna get around to it eventually, I guess. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about Daredevil next week because I spent so much time on Judas and the Black Messiah this week. I'm gonna talk about Daredevil next week, and plus I think I'm gonna give you a short. I think it's a good show. I think it's really good. Do I think it's better than the Netflix show? Well, that time will tell. Only 2 episodes are out so far, so I can only tell you that the 2 episodes that are out are pretty good. They're pretty solid. I think the Netflix version was better, but there's nothing wrong with what Disney put out so far. All right. That's it, y'all. I appreciate everybody for stopping by. Thank you guys for your time. If you are so inclined, because I am still in the middle of economic problems, hit the Cash App, $5, $10, whatever. I really appreciate it. Thank you everybody for your time again, and I'll talk to you guys later.